Growing up in a household full of Sunday school teachers, I obviously had an important connection, and Scripture's always been something that's been important to me. Though I knew certain people growing up that looked at Scripture as the only thing you could read, the only thing you could consume. For them, anything that wasn't connected to Scripture wasn't worth reading or studying or looking at. The question then for us, as we think about that idea, think about the importance of Scripture, is can there be other teachings aside from Scripture that can help us listen to God? Well, the wise men have an answer for that question for us today. Now, here we have a group of learned men all the way from the east, Gentiles. So these would have been people who had no way of knowing who the King of the Jews was or who the Messiah was, and certainly not who Jesus was. Yet through their learnings, they saw a star. And through what they knew, they could tell that the star was important. They knew enough to follow this star because it would lead them to the King of the Jews. They knew enough to know that the star was leading them to a child, and that this child was important enough for them to leave their own lands and go and pay homage to him. The wise men wouldn't have had the Bible. They wouldn't have had Scripture. Yet their learning brought them to the place where they could stop and listen and make their way to follow God. Yet the wise men's search doesn't end there. They knew enough to know that their knowledge was not enough, that they needed a little bit more to continue their journey. They knew that they must look for help. They went to the logical place to learn about the King of the Jews, the palace. Unfortunately for them, Herod was able to call the bearers of Scripture, those who could provide their knowledge to help the wise men in their search. The wise men, too, were open to having God's direct provision of knowledge. When they're warned in a dream about Herod, they left for their homeland by another road. When God called out to them, they listened. Now, God speaks to us in a myriad of ways. Sometimes we find that God is speaking to us through the natural world, as we see with the wise men in their search for the star. At times it's through our contemplation, our stopping to hear what it is that God has to say. Perhaps even we can hear God through our favorite stories, the very point and purpose of things like the gospel according to superheroes. These are the ways, these natural ways, these other paths aside from Scripture that the wise man heard what God was saying, and that the wise man used to answer God's call. However, the wise men also show us that we can't just rely on these other methods. They can help bring us closer to God, but we still require the tried and true methods of Scripture. That's what the wise men seek when they reach out for aid, for help in their quest. It's through Scripture, at the very least through those knowledgeable of Scripture, the wise men are able to find the exact place where the baby Jesus lay. It's through Scripture, ultimately, that the wise men are able to see God made fully manifest to them. That manifestation being the meaning of the word Epiphany. It's after this encounter with Scripture that the wise men are able to be open to hearing God's warning to them in their dreams. We need Scripture. We need its tried and true way to listen to God and to see what it is that God has to reveal to us. But God speaks to us and is made manifest to us in many other ways as well. And we need those paths of listening. We need to be open to all the different ways that God is speaking to us too. So whatever you do, take all the opportunities that God is providing. Listen to all those different opportunities to take in what God is saying to you. Just remember to center all those paths in Scripture. This is the method you will see me using as I preach to you as well. It's the same method I use for resources like the Gospel according to superheroes. If you feel you need to learn more about Scripture, these are good places to start. Just as the wise men found their place to start in the star, and then furthered that step through their learnings from the chief priests and scribes of Jerusalem. At the same time, make sure that these methods are starting places to help you learn more about Scripture and what God is saying to you personally through those words.